Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to Salesforce Helping Hand channel. My name is Har Prajapati, and today I'm going to share with you one of the very important questions and answer which are recently asked 2025 on the LWC. Okay, so let's share my screen with you. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. Okay, so let me go through the RSIT. So guys, today we'll discuss all the questions which are recently asked in all the interviews which are on the basis of LWC. Okay, so let's start. So first question, what recently asked is what are DOM events and why they are important in LWC. Okay, so DOM events are signal triggered by user action like click, input changes, right? In the LWC, they are important capture user interaction and executing business logic. Okay. It's enable dynamic and responsive UIs. So next question what they ask is, can you name 5 standard DOM events used frequently in LWC? So common event include click, change, input key up, and blur. So these cover most user interactions like buttons, clicks, right, from the keyboard actions. So third question they ask is what happen when a click event in trigger in LWC button? The assign JS handler function execute receiving the event object. This allow you to access a button state label and perform a business logic. Next question, how do you listen to a change event in Lightning input component? So what you have to do is you have to register in the template, right? So this is the way you can register the it and you can listen the whatever happen in the event, right? Now the next question is, how is an input event different from the change event? Input fire immediately as the user types. Great of real-time validations. Change fire only after the value is committed on blur or enter. Okay. So the next question is, does LWC automatically support all the native DOM events? Yes, most of the standard DOMs events are supported directly in templates. Rare events like before input may not be cross browser reliable. Now the next question is, can we register DOM event directly in HTML template, right? And of an LWC component. Okay. So yes, using a syntax on click, and this is the basically syntax to make this, and inline a JavaScript on click alert is not supported. How does the LWC framework handle native DOM event binding under the hood? So LWC automatically wires events listener to elements within the components. Shadow DOMs ensure proper scoping and encapsulation. In event binding, case sensitive in LWC. Yes, events name must be lowercase like on click using the wrong cases prevent the handler from firing. How do you write a handler function for a button click in LWC? So define the method in JS like handle click event and you can just give it whatever actions is required. Okay. Suppose you want to update a variable every time a user type into a text field. Which event will you use here? So use the input event as it's fire on every keystroke, enabling real-time update. Write a snip to capture user input using the onIt function, onIt event in LWC. So we can use this handle on input and we can just wrap it up. Okay. Can we bind a multiple event listener to the same element in LWC? In template, only one handler per event is allowed. For multiple listeners, use add listener and render callback. You have checkbox and need to track whether it's selected or not. Which event would you use? We would use here the change event as it's fire when the checkbox is checked or unchecked. If the need to validate user input, they type which event is better, input or change. Input is better because it's fire continuously while typing The changes wait until the user commit the value. A button trigger an API call. How would you prevent double submissions? So what we have to do is disable the button after the first click and re-enable it once the API call completed. This prevent duplicate request. So how can you stop a standard DOM event from propagating further? We have to use this called event.stop propagations inside the handler to prevent bubbling. Given a use case where key up and key down events are necessary, so useful for keyboard shortcut like Control Enter or detecting when a key is pressed and released separately. How do you manage focus and blurry events in the multi inputs form in LWC? Attach on focus and on blur handlers on input to track when user enter on leave fields, useful for validation or highlight. The next question is, what if two handlers are listening to the same click event? What will be the execute first? The handler attach first, execute first. The order depend on registration sequence. Okay. So the question is, can you call event default inside LWC and when it useful? Yes, you can. It useful to stop default browser actions like preventing a form from auto submitting. Can we use the same handler method for different event? Yes, by binding the same method in multiple events inside use event.type, don't differentiate. Is event.type always reliable inside an event listener? Generally, yes, it refer to the elements that trigger that event, but for delegation, use current.target, event.target. How do you bind context this properly in standard DOM event callback? LWC automatically bind the class method to the component instance. So this work uh, without manual binding. How do you attach an event listener to dynamically create an element in LWC? So we have to use this .template.query selector and add event listener inside the render callback. Can you access native DOM method like add event listener directly in the LWC? Yes. Inside lifecycle hook, render callback or connected callback, we can use it. How do you handle submit event for custom form? Ref field in a form and listen for on submit. Then variable before processing. Is it recommended to use arrow function in the event handler? No. Avoid in the template. Use class method so LWC binds these automatically. Which of the following events should be used for a file upload input, change or input? Use change because it's fire when a file is selected. What is the output of console.log event inside a click event handler? It log the full event object, including detail like target, type, and coordinates. Okay. Can you stop the click event from executing on parent elements? Yes. Use event or stop propagations. Okay. Which event are best for real-time validation? Input for continuous typing and blur for final validations when the field is left. Okay. So which event is not supported in all browser? Before input is not fully supported everywhere. In a form, which event do you rely on capture form field data at once? Use the submit event on the form. Next question is tell me how you handle a scenario where input field were not updating correctly on user actions. So I check the correct input versus change was used and confirm the handler event or target value. Have you implemented custom validation using native DOM events in LWC? Yes. Typically with the input and blur events to validate while typing and after the leaving the field. In previous project, how did you manage form submission with event? I used to on submit to stop default submissions, validate fields, then dispatch custom logic to save the data. Next question is an input field does not seems to trigger your on change functions. What might be the issue? The answer is changes fire only on a blur event. If validation is needed while typing, input should be used. Have you have let's say you have a 5 text inputs, right? And you need to capture values from each without writing 5 separate handlers. What will you do it? Assign a name attribute to each input and use one handler reading event.target.name, event.target.value. You have a 5 text input, and how would you do it? Use signal handler with data attributes or name to different input dynamically. The next question is, can event delegations be used in LWC reduce event listener? If so, how? Yes, attach a listener to parent and use event.target to identify which child target the event. The next question is, how do you pass specific events data to handler without in LWC? Without handler in LWC, use data.attribute to in HTML and access within the event.target.dataset. Next question is 43. What is the best way to listen to key combinations in LWC? Use key down or key up. Check event.control V and event.key. How do you trigger a DOM event programmatically from JavaScript in LWC? Call event.dispatch event, new event click. In an input form, when would you use blur instead of change? Use blur when you need to validate validation immediately after leaving the field, not after commit. Can you bind DOM events to elements conditionally using event true or if or false? Yes. Event binding work with the conditional rendered elements. The next question is, how does elements dot current target return and how it's different from event dot target? Target element that initiate the event and current target element the handler is bound to. Okay. So the next question is, how would you log all events detail on every button click in component? Use console.log, JSON stringify event or inspected the event in DevTools. Okay. How would you prevent accidentally double click on button using standard DOM events? Disable the button on the first click and re-enable it after processing. An input field is triggering the expected event in LWC, and how do you debug it? Add console log, verify event binding, and check it event type input versus change is correct. What tool or browser feature help in tracking DOM event in LWC? So Chrome DevTools event listener tab plus console debugging. Next question is, can browser extension affect DOM event LWC? And how do you test this? Yes. Extension can inject listener and test in incognito mode without extensions. Question number 53. Why might event prevent default not to stop the submissions? Because it's called the wrong handler or an element other than the form. Next question is, how do you test event handler in jest for LWC? Dispatch event with LWC dispatch event and assert handler behavior. How would you what would happen if the handler method throw an error in the middle of an event execution? So basically JS error stop executions, later logic won't run unless the wrap in try catch. How can you log event inflow from a child component back to the parent? Add a log in each handler at a child and parent levels to trace the propagations. Can lighting component use native add event listener inside the render callback? Yes, that's the recommended place for dynamic event binding. What happen if you bind a method without parenthesis in HTML template? It execute only when the event occur, not immediately. How would you throat or debounce a frequently trigger event like scroll? Implement debounce or throttle function in the handler to limit calls. How do you implement instant search in LWC using the event? So what we have to do, we have to use on input applied bounds and trigger server side research for a user type. In a recent project, how did you validate multiple fields before submission using the DOM event? So use per field input blur for validations, then consolidate check on submit. Have you ever had to override a browser default event behavior for better UX or UI? Yes, like preventing enter from auto submitting a form during typing. Can you describe a situations where you use mouse down versus click? Use mouse down is for a drag and drop where immediate actions was required. Have you ever needed to trigger on event manually based on the another? Yes. Triggered a change event programmatically after a value update. How did you implement keyboard accessibility and like enter key for buttons in LWC component? So use key down and check if event.key is enter, then execute click logic. How do you avoid hard coding event names across components? Store them in a constant or a config log for reuse. What are the best practices for naming handler methods? So use handle and event name conventions like handle click and handle inputs. Do you recommend it adding event listener in the lifecycle hook like connected callback only for global object, window document for template, bind in HTML? What should you clean for remove event listener manually in LWC? So in disconnected callback, especially for globe listener to avoid leaks. Which event should not be used with the lightning input for tracking the real time? So load event, it's not prevent for inputs. What would be the best handler for validating drop down selections? So we have to use is change event. Which event will be fire first if both click and on click are bound to the same elements? So click fire and before db click. Okay. Next question is, what is the difference between trigger timing between key up and key down and key press? So key down when the key is pressed, key press when the character key is pressed, and key up when released. True or false? A checkbox only fire a change event, not input. So this is true. Can focus and blur event can be captured lighting input flow? Yes, using on focus and blur attributes in the template. Write a sample LWC HTML that capture username they type. So we get to provide this particular code. Okay. Create a component that change a background color on the mouse over and using the mouse over. Use mouse over template and ingest style using event.target.style background. Write a button, click handler that looks click and disable the button for 3 seconds. In handler log message disable is equal to true and use timeout to render 3. Create a component that display key code every down and inside the text input. So we can use like this. DOM event in summary. DOM events are connected user interactions to component logic. LWC support native events, custom handling and best practices like delegation, validation, and accessibility. So guys, these all are the questions which we discussed regarding to the LWC component. If you have any questions, you can let me know. Thank you. Stay tuned for more videos. Bye bye.